Have you ever sat alone and realized that you no longer believe in the very thoughts inside your own head, not because you are weak, but because there have been too many times when you listened to a thought that you believed was yours, and it ruined everything? A decision you should not have made. A message you should not have sent. Words you should not have spoken. And then you sit back in silence and ask yourself, where did that come from? Because if it was you, why did it lead you into pain? And if it was not you, then who is speaking inside your head? You were taught that God will speak to you. But no one ever told you how he speaks. No one ever told you that his voice does not come from the outside. No thunder, no echo, no obvious sign, but rather a thought. A very ordinary thought, so ordinary that you ignore it. A very gentle thought, so gentle that you do not trust it. A very familiar thought, so familiar that you call it, "That's just me thinking." But what confuses you the most is there are thoughts that are not like you. You are angry, but a thought says, "Don't say anything." You want to walk away, but something inside says, "Stay." You are afraid, but a quiet peace appears for no reason. And you do not understand why in the same mind there are two voices. One voice pulls you down, one voice holds you back. One voice makes you panic. One voice makes you calm. One voice makes you doubt everything. One voice needs no explanation, but you know it is right, and you call all of that my thoughts. But what if I told you that is exactly why you have missed him again and again, not because he did not speak, but because you heard and you did not recognize that it was him. And the most dangerous thing is not that you cannot hear God's voice. It is that you are hearing him, but you are assigning that voice to yourself. So you ignore it, you doubt it, you even resist it. And maybe right now inside your own head there is a very gentle thought, very quiet, trying to tell you something, but you are about to miss it. Once again, do not be quick to believe everything you think. And also, do not be quick to dismiss everything you hear in the silence. Because I will tell you something that took me a very long time to admit. There are thoughts that are not yours, and there are thoughts that have saved you while you did not even know it. I used to think everything in my head was mine. I believed every thought. I reacted to every emotion. I acted on every impulse. And I called it instinct, intuition. I'm just being myself. Until I began to realize something very hard to accept. Not everything I think leads me to life. There are thoughts that push me into arguments I could have avoided. There are thoughts that make me say words I wish I could take back. There are thoughts that make me walk away from places I should have stayed. And what scared me the most was not that I was wrong, but that I believed I was right while I was being led in the wrong direction. Do you know that feeling? That feeling you only recognize after everything has already happened. When you sit alone and replay every moment and you think, why did I think that? Why didn't I stop? Why didn't I listen to something inside me that told me to stop? Because, if you are honest, there were moments you knew. You could not explain it. You had no proof. But something inside you said very clearly, don't do this. But you still did, and so did I. There was a time I remember very clearly. It was not a big moment. No drama, no crisis. Just a very ordinary conversation. I was angry. Not explosive anger, just irritated. And in my head it started running. You should say this. They need to hear this. You have the right to say it. It sounded very reasonable. It sounded very right. It sounded very much like me, but somewhere deep inside there was something very small, very quiet, saying, "Be quiet." Not because I was weak, not because I was completely wrong, but simply, "Don't say anything." But it was too small, too gentle, not strong enough to compete with all the thoughts shouting in my head. And I did not listen. I spoke. Every sentence, clear, sharp, precise. And the moment I finished, there was a very strange silence. Not outside, but inside. A feeling you cannot explain. Not immediate guilt, not immediate regret. Just a sense of being off. As if I had just stepped off a path I was supposed to stay on. A few hours later, I began to understand. Not because someone told me, but because that small voice from the beginning came back. But this time, it was no longer gentle. It was no longer, "Don't speak." It was, "That was not what you should have done." And what made me tremble was, that voice did not sound like the other thoughts. It did not argue. It did not justify. It did not shout. It simply knew. And for the first time, I began to ask myself, if that wasn't me, then who was it? I started paying closer attention, not to all my thoughts, but to the thoughts that were not like me, the thoughts that came when I was about to do something wrong, the thoughts that appeared before I made a mistake, the thoughts that did not come from emotion but from somewhere deeper. But the problem was they always came very quietly, never overwhelming, never forcing, never controlling. They were simply there. And if I did not pause, I would miss them. There was a season when I began to fear my own mind because I was no longer sure which thoughts were mine, which thoughts were reactions, which thoughts were fear, and which thoughts were something else. I prayed. Not to ask for answers, but to ask a very simple question. God, how do I know it is you? There was no audible reply, no sign, no special feeling, just silence. And in that very silence, I began to realize something I had missed for a long time. He did not start speaking when I asked. He had been speaking long before that. I had simply never learned how to discern. I thought that, if it were God, it had to be obvious. It had to be powerful. It had to be completely different. But what I did not understand was, he was not trying to make his voice stand out. He was making you quiet enough to recognize the difference. And that is where everything began to change. Not in my circumstances, not in other people, but in the way I listened. I stopped believing every thought. I began to observe. There are thoughts that come very fast, urgent, full of emotion, full of pressure. And there are thoughts that come very slowly, very clear, very peaceful, not always comfortable. Sometimes they ask me to stop, apologize, let go, be silent, but they always carry something I cannot create on my own. Clarity. And the most frightening thing I realized was, there were so many times in the past I had heard it, but I did not choose it. Not because I did not hear, but because I did not believe. I believed what was louder, noisier, more logical, more aligned with my emotions. And I ignored the quietest thing. But that quiet thing was the very thing that had tried to save me, more than I realized. And if you are hearing this, I need you to pause for a moment. Not to think, but to remember. How many times have you had a very small thought, very clear, telling you, "Don't do that," or "Do this," and you felt it, not with logic, but with a very strange certainty, but you ignored it, and afterward you wished you had listened? I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty. I'm saying this because there is something you need to see. You have not been abandoned. You have never been met with silence. You simply were never taught how to listen. And that is about to change. Because in the next part, I will tell you a story. Not to teach you, but to show you what happens when someone begins to listen to a voice they once thought was their own. His name was Daniel. Not a special person, not a pastor, not spiritual, just someone who was exhausted from having to make every decision inside his own head. Daniel did not doubt God. He believed. He prayed. He went to church. He read the Bible. But there was one thing he never said out loud. He did not know how to hear him, not the kind of hearing with his ears, but how to know when a thought in his head was not his own. And the older he got, the more decisions, the more pressure, the more noise in his mind. Daniel began to realize something. It was not that he lacked answers. It was that he had too many. Every choice had a reason. Every direction had logic. Every decision could be justified. And that paralyzed him. One evening, Daniel sat in his car, engine off, but he did not get out. He had just left a meeting, a big opportunity, an offer that anyone would say, "You should take it." Higher salary, better position, clearer future. Everything looked right, but throughout the meeting, there was something inside him, not at ease, not fear, not anxiety, just not at ease. And as he sat in the car, phone still open to the offer email, a thought appeared. Don't take it. It came very quickly, very clearly, and disappeared. Daniel stared at the screen. Don't take it. No reason, no analysis, no explanation, just one sentence. And immediately another wave of thoughts rushed in. Are you kidding? This is the opportunity you prayed for. Don't be stupid. You need the money. Your family needs this. They were louder, faster, more logical, and they sounded more like him. Daniel sighed, started the car, but before he could drive away, that feeling came back. Not a thought, but a pause inside. He turned the engine off. Silence. And this time, there were no words, just a very clear sense. No. Daniel did not like it, because it was not logical. He wanted a reason. He wanted a sign. He wanted something to prove he was not crazy. But there was nothing. Only a restlessness when he imagined saying yes, and a strange peace when he imagined saying no. He sat there longer than he wanted to admit, and for the first time, he did not ask, which one is right? He asked, which one is peaceful? That night, Daniel did not reply to the email. The next day, he declined, not certain, not confident, no backup plan, just he could not do otherwise. 1 week passed. Nothing happened. 2 weeks, no sign that he had been right. 3 weeks, doubt began to return. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe that was just fear. Maybe I missed the only opportunity. And then one morning, Daniel received a call from that company, but not to invite him back, instead to inform him the project that position was responsible for had been cancelled. Budget cuts. The people who had just been hired were let go after only a few weeks. Daniel sat still. No big reaction, no shock, no celebration, just a very slow realization spreading inside him. He remembered that moment in the car. Don't take it. No logic, no evidence, but it had been right. And what made him tremble was not that he had avoided risk. It was that something had known in advance when he knew nothing, and it had tried to tell him. That night, Daniel did not pray the same way anymore. Not, God, please speak to me. But, God, was that you? There was no audible answer. But when he asked, a very familiar thought, very gentle, appeared. You heard. Daniel sat there, without saying a word, because for the first time he did not feel like he was imagining it. He felt led. In the days that followed, he began paying closer attention, not to every thought, only to the thoughts that came without him creating them, the thoughts that appeared at the right moment, the thoughts that did not force, but also did not disappear. Once he was about to send a message, a very normal sentence. Nothing wrong with it, but right before pressing send, something inside him said, "Don't send it." He paused, not understanding. He read the message again. It still seemed normal, but this time he listened. He did not send it. 2 hours later, he received news. That person had just gone through something very difficult. His message, if sent, would have made everything worse. Daniel put his phone down. Once again, not a dramatic miracle, just a small thought. But it had changed something, and that was when he began to recognize a pattern. Not all thoughts are the same. There are thoughts that come from emotion, fast, heavy, pushing, and there are thoughts that come from a very quiet place, slow, clear, not forcing. And the strangest thing was, those quiet thoughts always led to life, not always easy, but always right. And gradually Daniel stopped asking, "Is this God?" He began asking, "Does this carry peace?" Not a pleasant feeling, but a clarity that does not need explanation. And when he began to live by that, his life did not become perfect, but it became guided. Fewer regrets, fewer impulsive reactions, fewer careless words, and more moments when he paused before things went wrong. Daniel never heard a voice, no sound, no images, no dramatic signs, just thoughts. But now he no longer called all of them his own. And if you look at that story, you might think that is just intuition. But there is one question you cannot ignore. Why are there thoughts that know what you do not know? Why are there thoughts that come at the exact moment you need them? And why are the quietest thoughts the ones that change everything? I will tell you what Daniel realized, but no one had ever explained to him. Not everything you think comes from the same source. There was something Daniel took a very long time to admit. Not because he did not understand, but because if it was true, then everything he had ever believed about himself would have to change. Not everything you think comes from you. It sounds simple, but if you pause for a moment and truly face it, it will make you tremble, because it means there is more than one source speaking in your mind. And the issue is not whether you can hear or not. It is who you are believing. Daniel began to recognize this, not through theory, but through very real moments. There were days he woke up and immediately a chain of thoughts appeared. You're not good enough. You're falling behind. Everyone else is moving forward. You're about to fail. They came very fast, very familiar, very logical. And if he was not paying attention, he would live that entire day based on those thoughts, act differently, speak differently, decide differently, not because circumstances changed, but because the voice he believed changed. But there were other days, the same person, the same circumstances, and a different thought appeared. Calm down. You're not alone. Just take it one step at a time. Don't rush. Not loud, not forcing, but enough to change how he stepped into that day. And Daniel began to see a very clear truth. Thoughts are not just thoughts. They are guidance. They are direction. They are paths. And every thought you choose to believe is a path you step onto. This explains why two people can be in the same situation but live two completely different lives. Not because they have different lives, but because they believe different voices. The Bible does not say randomly, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Not actions first, not circumstances first, but the mind, because that is where everything begins. But there is something very few people say clearly. Not every thought in your mind deserves to be believed. Daniel began to discern, not by logic, not by analysis, but by nature. There are thoughts that carry fear, not warning, but fear that paralyzes. There are thoughts that carry pressure, pushing, rushing, not giving you time to breathe. There are thoughts that carry condemnation, not correction, but making you feel worthless. And then there are other thoughts. They do not yell, they do not force, they do not argue. But when they come, something happens inside you. You know, not the kind of knowing with logic, but a clarity that does not need explanation. That is what Daniel began to call the difference. Not different in content, but different in source. A thought can say, "Don't do this." But if it comes from fear, it will make you shrink. If it comes from God, it will make you stop, but it will not make you collapse. A thought can say, "You need to change." But if it comes from condemnation, it will make you feel useless. If it comes from God, it will make you feel invited to become better. That is the difference no one teaches you. Because from the outside, they can sound the same. But on the inside, they carry two completely different natures. And here is what changes everything. God does not compete with other voices by yelling louder. He is quieter, not because he is weak, but because he does not need to force. He speaks in a way that if you are close enough, you will recognize it. If you are not, you will miss it. That is why some people say, "I have never heard God." But the truth is, they have. They are just waiting for a different voice, a clearer voice, louder, impossible to confuse, while the real voice has been there in the smallest moments, when you are about to say something and something tells you to stop, when you are about to go one way and a slight uneasiness appears, when you are panicking and an unexplainable peace slips in. That is not coincidence. That is how he speaks. But there is a deeper reason you miss it, because your mind has been trained to believe what is bigger, faster, louder, more emotional. You believe what makes you feel strong. But God's voice often does not make you feel strong. It makes you stop. And in this world, stopping feels like weakness. But in reality, that is where you begin to hear clearly. Daniel began to change one very small thing, but very important. He no longer asked, "Does this thought make sense?" He asked, "Where is this thought coming from?" And that question changed everything. Because for the first time, he was no longer a victim of his thoughts. He became an observer. And when you begin to observe, you will see. Not all thoughts come at the same time. Not all of them carry the same energy. Not all of them lead you to the same place. And when you begin to discern, you will see something very clear. The thoughts that lead you to life always come with peace, even when they are hard. Even when they ask you to change, they do not break you, they shape you. And that is where you begin to understand a sentence that used to be only words in the Bible. "My sheep hear my voice." Not with the ears, but with recognition. Not because that voice is loud, but because you are familiar with it. And what is amazing is, you do not need to create that voice. You only need to learn not to ignore it. Because right now, while you are listening, there may be a very gentle thought appearing, not forcing you, not interrupting, just there. And if you ignore it, you will continue as usual. But if you stop just a little and ask, "Where is this coming from?" you may begin to hear what you have been missing this whole time. Next, I will tell you something you may not like to hear. Because once you begin to discern, you will no longer be able to pretend you do not know. There is a moment when everything changes. Not when you understand, but when you can no longer pretend that you do not know. You can keep saying, "It's just a thought." You can keep justifying, "I'm probably overthinking." You can keep ignoring those very small things. But if you are honest, there have been times you knew, not guessing, not analyzing, not hoping, but knowing. You knew you should not say that. But you said it anyway. You knew you should stop, but you kept going. You knew you should turn back, but you walked away. And what you call a mistake did not actually begin when you acted. It began when you ignored. Ignored what? That very small, very quiet thing that spoke to you beforehand. This is the part most people do not like, because it takes away a very familiar excuse. I didn't know. No, you did know. You just did not want to believe it. Because if you believed it, you would have to change. You would have to stop when you wanted to continue. You would have to be silent when you wanted to speak. You would have to let go when you wanted to hold on. And that is not easy. So you choose to believe other thoughts, the louder ones, the more comfortable ones, the ones that align more with your emotions. You call them reason, reality, the most logical thing. But if you look back, how many times has that most logical thing led you somewhere you did not want to go? And how many times has the illogical thing, that very quiet thing, been right? This is where you have to face a truth. You are not lacking guidance. You are choosing which voice you want to hear. Hear this slowly, because it will change the way you see everything. You are not lost. You are just listening to the wrong voice. And every time you listen to the wrong one, it is not because the right voice was absent. It is because you chose a different one. No one likes to hear this, because it means you cannot blame circumstances. You cannot blame other people. You cannot say, I wasn't being led. Because you were being led, you just did not follow. But do not misunderstand this. This is not condemnation. This is a wake-up call, because if you have missed it before, that also means you have heard it before. And if you have heard before, you can hear again, right now. Not when you are more perfect. Not when you are more spiritual. Not when you get everything right. Right now, in your own mind. But there is one thing you must decide. Will you continue to live, reacting to every thought that appears? Or will you pause and begin to choose? Because from this moment on, you cannot go back to how it was before. You have seen, you have realized, there is a difference. And that means, every time you're about to say something, every time you're about to decide, every time a thought appears, you will hear two things. One louder, one quieter. One pushing you, one holding you back. One making you feel like you must act now. One giving you space to pause. And in that moment, you will know, not everything, but enough to choose. The question is not, which one is from God? The question is, which one will you be faithful to? Because there are people who hear very clearly and still do not follow. And there are people who hear only a little, but they pause, and it changes their entire life. You do not need to hear perfectly. You just need to stop ignoring. And maybe right now, while you are listening, there is something very specific rising in your mind. Something you need to stop. Something you need to say. A direction you need to return to. You know it. You do not need anyone to explain it. And you are doing what you always do, delaying, later, when I'm more sure, when there's a clearer sign. But you already have one. It just did not come the way you expected. It came quietly, and if you ignore it this time, it will not disappear, but you will become less sensitive, and gradually you will return to the old sentence, I can't hear God. Not because he stopped speaking, but because you stopped listening. But the good news is, you are still here, and that means it is not too late. In the final part, I will not teach you anything new. I only want you to do one thing, not to understand, but to begin listening. Do not try to understand more. You have heard enough. Now, just pause for a moment. Not to think, not to analyze, just be still. If you can, close your eyes for a moment. You do not need to do anything special. You do not need to try to feel anything. Just be there, because what you are looking for does not come when you try. It comes when you stop. God, I do not come to you today with answers. I come with the chaos in my mind. With all the thoughts, I no longer know which ones to believe. I have believed too many wrong things. I have followed things that led me away from you, and there were times I heard you, but I did not recognize it. Or I recognized it, but I did not believe it. God, if you are still speaking, teach me how to listen, not with my ears, but with something deeper. Teach me how to recognize your voice among all the noise in my mind. Help me not to quickly believe every thought, but also not to ignore the ones that come from you. Give me discernment, so that when a thought comes from fear, I will recognize it. So that when a thought comes from pressure, I will not be pulled away. And when a thought comes from you, even if it is small, even if it is quiet, I will not miss it anymore. God, maybe right now, you are saying something to me, not loud, not obvious, but real. Give me enough stillness to hear, and enough courage to believe, and enough obedience to follow. Not tomorrow, not when I am more certain, but the moment I recognize it. I do not want to keep living, being pulled by every thought that appears. I want to be led, not by emotion, not by fear, but by you. And right now, I choose to pause. I choose to listen. I choose to believe that you are still speaking. Amen. If you are still here, that is not random. You did not accidentally hear this far. There is a reason you did not scroll past this video, not because of the content, but because something inside you held you here. And maybe that is exactly what we have been talking about. If you felt that, do not ignore it this time. Do not just nod and move on like before. Do one very simple thing. Write down this sentence, not for anyone else to read, but so you can see it yourself. I no longer believe every thought in my head. And if you are brave enough, leave that sentence in the comments, not to prove anything, but to mark a moment, the moment you begin to live differently. And after you write it, do not rush away. Pause a little longer, read the other comments. You will realize you are not the only one, not the only one who has been confused, not the only one who has heard but did not recognize. And for the first time, this is no longer a private battle. It becomes an awakening. If you want to continue this journey, not just to hear, but to learn how to recognize, stay. Subscribe to the channel, not for me, but because you know you need this. Not just one video, but a process. And if you feel there is someone in your life who is trapped inside their own mind, send this video to them. No explanation needed. Just send it. Maybe that will be the thought they have been praying to receive. And before you leave, remember this. You are not being met with silence. You are simply learning how to listen correctly. And from now on, everything will begin to change.